Welcome back to the garden. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently this week. I am going to essentially go over what I'm doing and just kind of let you know where I'm at or what some of the thought process and plans were. So as you guys know, I basically plant in beds around my house rather than like a big row garden or anything because I do live in a trailer park. Now this particular area is in between the runners that are, when I had them set my trailer, I had them set it as far back as they could. And so I have about 10 feet of runners showing in front of my trailer. And I'm basically trying to recoup that into usable growing space, but that also means that it has to stay looking very presentable at the same time. So I'm finding that sweet potatoes make a great sort of a viney border type plant, and that foliage can hide things behind it. So I planted the mums and sedum and stuff behind, and then came in just in front of with the sweet potatoes. And then the plan was to do a layer of kale and then a layer of beets right at the front. And by the time the kale had grown up, the beets would basically be done and I was pulling them out. The problem with that came when the beet starts did not make it. So I'm kind of playing it by ear on this. I need to get starts in the ground so they have time to get established and figure out what's going on. And I've got basically, I think it's 2 or maybe 3 things of brassica starts and some curcubits, and I still need to plant a lot of tomatoes that I brought back up here from the farm. I did get 2 tomato plants from Azure when I got the asparagus, and I realized I don't have footage of that, but they are actually planted in a space where we lost a tree on either side of that. Those were cabbage white larvae on the bottom of that leaf. My seedlings did not do terribly well inside. Like, they sprouted and then they just kind of sat. They didn't put on a lot of root growth. They didn't get big. They didn't have more than like their first 2 leaves or so for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I finally, when it started getting warm, I finally stuck them outside on the porch and just sort of like, well, it's hotter inside than it is outside, so hopefully they will start doing something. And they did. The problem with that is they also picked up the bugs. Now, they did not have any issues with crickets, which is what I have had issues with eating my seedlings and seeds and stuff in previous years. Now, I have not actually seen many crickets at all this year. I think part of that is due to getting some of the weeds out and mulching. They just don't have nearly as much habitat. And then the last few years, I also have had an uptick in the praying mantis population. So I think they probably took care of some of it as well. Now, around these plants, I am just tearing up comfrey or chopping it up and putting it around essentially as a mulch. And this will basically just sort of compost down on top of the soil and release the nutrients back into this soil instead of the soil over where they're at. The great thing with comfrey is it will mine minerals and things out of the soil because it puts down really long roots. Now back here, this is not soil that was, I don't want to say native because the sandy soil is not native either, but basically the soil up there has been there for years. The soil back here in January, I got a bunch of cardboard from my As Your Standard drop that was used to package pallets. And so I put it down, put soil down on top, and a bale of the fine pine bedding shavings from TSC. Now this is my asparagus bed. A couple weeks ago, I put in the red asparagus starts that I got from Azure, and then these are the asparagus starts that I believe are Martha Washington variety that I started from seed here at home. So mine are quite a bit leggier. That's why at times you'll see me kind of trying to make sure they flop into the bed instead of outside of it so I don't mow over them. And I'm just moving the wood chip out of the way so it doesn't get in the hole and down around the root ball, because that will tie up nitrogen and I don't want that. And then as it rains, it just kind of fills back in around the plants. That's why it's sort of dark right around the plants from before, and then it gets more coverage mulch-wise going further out. Now, that mulch does seem to be helping retain moisture and not compact soil and stuff like that, so that's working really well. I do have some rhizomal grasses that are encroaching from the neighbor's house. That's their shed. Part of the reason I put the asparagus there was I was hoping it would do these, like, it does these sort of like ferny type grass looking things as it gets bigger. I'm not sure it'll get big enough to even be a foot tall this year. But anyway, the hope is eventually that will kind of hide that shed. Now this bed, I did get out the weekend. I did the last garden tour and get most of the weeds out of it. Not all. There is still a little bit of poison sumac down by the meter, and the big thorny ones that I didn't have gloves. The tomato cages are actually going out. I've got a couple places where we've lost trees, and so there's like these big mulch circles in the middle of the yard. And I'm essentially putting 2, 3, 4 tomatoes around those. And the hope is that they will have more sun than back here and also get more airflow, because we do have a fairly wind tunnelish lot. And I'm basically trying to finish off this tray of seedlings. So I'm planting the Premier and the Lancenato kale. There was 2 things of calendula that survived. Those can be a trap crop for aphids, but they're also a medicinal flower. And so I put those over towards the meter so that I'm not messing with stuff down there where that poison sumac keeps coming back. And then a couple of the bronze leaf fennel are also going back here to try to protect a little bit. And then I've got other brassicas in the other 2 trays that I'm going to come back and fill this bed in with. And I might try to direct sow some Brussel sprouts in here before too terribly long to see if I can get those to grow at all. I have not had luck in the past, but my uncles did really well with Brussels sprouts last year. So I also did find out that the overhang on that section, basically the back foot and a half of that bed don't get water when it rains because of the overhang. So I'm going to have to keep watering or get the plants big enough they will find water elsewhere. Do something. Blackberries are ripe and ready to pick. Honestly, y'all, I might very well just leave those for the birds. This stuff up here hasn't changed a whole lot. The lemon tree is still growing. The lilies are blooming, and the mullein has grown probably another foot now. The strawberries are done. The mulberries are done. So that is great. I am still rooting runners. They're not suckers. Now this potato plant is now blooming. So I will be digging that in the next few weeks as I see the leaves start to yellow. And you can see the sweet potatoes there towards the back starting to bush out a little bit. And today the leaves from the comfrey are turning blackish brown and starting to kind of disintegrate into the soil, and they will deposit the minerals that they soaked up in another area of the yard, because that is what they are great at doing. And then those are the potato sprouts for the ones that I actually planted. Now, I didn't show you guys Mama Peach last week, 2 weeks ago. She is setting some fruit. This is our off year, so not nearly as much as it would be in one of our main years. I did prune pretty heavily this spring, but you can still see that I do still have some oriental moth damage because I haven't been able to get a second spray in. I did spray with copper fungicide and BT back in, I believe, March. And then every time I go to, it's either really windy or it's supposed to rain. This is a tulip seed pod that I'm hopefully going to get baby tulips out of. When I broke it open, there was only like 2 seeds in there. So not really sure. The glads are, of course, getting bigger. And as I mentioned, the mulberries are done, at least on our side. So those are going to the birds as well. And then I forgot to show you guys that we do have lamb's ear. So have a great week.